We're going to have a panel on something I get asked about a lot, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well, which is if Bitcoin SV is going to be the enterprise blockchain for the biggest businesses of the world, how does it compare to other options? What are the factors that big businesses evaluate in deciding how or where they want to build blockchain applications? So I think this will be informative for everyone in the room and everyone watching on the live stream and thinking about how we build the future of Bitcoin SV. To help me discuss this, we've got 4 great panelists. Let's give them all a warm round of applause. First, he is a former executive at SBI Group in their crypto and digital currency businesses, and now he works for Bitcoin Association with me and our team as regional manager for Japan and South Korea. He's got a lot of great enterprise insight. You know him, you love him, Jerry David Chan. Next, coming to us from Australia, there's such a big Aussie contingent here, right? Aussie? Yay, good job. All right, he is the CEO of StrataNet Group, Chris Josselin. Coming to us from the Bay Area in California, he'll explain what he does, but he's a Microsoft Dynamics 365 ERP consultant. Please welcome Joshua Henslee. And the co-founder and CEO of UNISOT. I've become fond about describing him as the fish man because he likes to talk about supply chain management and fish. Stephan Nilsson. Norwegian salmon, if you've heard his prior speeches. So, to discuss things, let me first get each of you to introduce yourselves and your background so that our audience has some perspective on where you're coming from in this discussion. Jerry, we'll start with you.
Sure, hello. Hi, my name is Jerry Chan. I started as an electrical engineer. I worked about 14 years in Wall Street, most of my time at Goldman Sachs, then a little bit of time at JP Morgan. That's when I discovered Bitcoin. I quit to do some Bitcoin stuff. Unfortunately, it was ill-timed because that was around the time 2014 when Mt. Gox sort of went kaput in Japan, and that sort of took the industry into a 2-year dark age. And after that sort of came around, I joined SBI Group, who started their blockchain initiatives as a strategic sort of a foray into the space. And most recently, I've joined Bitcoin Association, where I can help engage with enterprises in Asia and companies who are looking into the space and trying to figure out how to use Bitcoin and blockchain for real business use cases.
And for those of you who are not familiar with SBI, it's one of the major, if not the major, internet financial services conglomerate in Japan. Yes. All right, Chris, tell us about your background.
Thanks, Jimmy. So StrataNet is a telecommunications infrastructure owner. We own a subsea cable network spanning Asia and then across out to the USA. So whilst we are very much playing at the infrastructure layer, we want to work with, collaborate, and invest with companies that are basically building new technologies to improve the service delivery to our customers, who are the tier 1 telcos around the place.
Okay.
I think as an example of that, we're working with a company at the moment in Australia that's using our platform to build a truth network, leveraging IoT, NFC, and blockchain technologies to basically track the provenance and authenticity of products moving from Australia into China.
Okay. Joshua.
I've been an implementation consultant at a Microsoft partner for 7 years, ever since I graduated college. I'm more on the technical side, so we travel a lot, and we do full life cycle implementations. So I've had some exposure to the blockchain space of our internal workings, and looking forward to this panel.
Got it. And then a lot of your clients would be enterprises, is that correct?
That's right, yes. We primarily target the middle market, so a cut down from where Stephan works with, where SAP is more the top. So that can bring a good perspective, I think.
Okay, great. Stephan, tell us about your experience and then what you're doing with UNISOT right now.
Yeah, right. So I have been working as an integration architect for like 20 years, mostly with SAP. So I've learned the hard way the problems company have to communicate with each other. And I launched UNISOT like 2 years ago. Now we got funding, and now we are starting taking my proof of concept code and gonna make a real enterprise application out of it.
Sure. Briefly, tell the audience what is UNISOT's product or.
So UNISOT product is for enterprises, for supply chains. So it's a plug-in for like SAP or Microsoft or other ERP systems, so that company very easily can integrate their current ERP systems with the Bitcoin SV blockchain without having to learn anything about blockchain or Bitcoin or anything like that. So just like companies are using internet and web pages today, they don't have to know anything about HTTP or TCP/IP.
Got it. So I want to go through various factors that enterprises need to consider as they're evaluating whether and how to build a blockchain or some type of ledger application. The first big one is this one. It's a constant question. If you're going to try something, do you do it on a truly public blockchain, like the Bitcoin blockchain, or something that's more a permissioned ledger, which many of us, including me and Dr. Wright and many people at nChain, all the people at nChain, would argue is not a blockchain at all. It's just a permissioned ledger. So, Jerry, take your thoughts on that. How should companies be evaluating whether to build on a public versus permissioned blockchain?
Yeah, I think this is one of the age-old questions, even one that I struggled with back in 2014-15, when this was the first question that all enterprises ask themselves: what's the difference between public blockchain or a private blockchain, which is just a permissioned ledger? I think the key concept that enterprises need to understand, and something that they can immediately relate to, is ask a bank why they're always reticent about using AWS or putting their data on the cloud. And I know a lot of the Wall Street banks still don't do that. It's because there are regulations involved with putting your customers' data on the cloud, and also the liability if you lose access to that information. That's very serious. So it's the risk of putting your data outside of your company's control is always the first and foremost on all IT, CTOs sort of a bank on their mind. And that's exact same question is that, the difference between public and private or permissioned ledger. That's why most banks always say, well, it's safe to do a permissioned ledger, of course, because it's just like using your own data center. But I think the message we need to collectively get across here is that actually with something like a public blockchain like BSV, with proper key management, it's actually better than your own data center. So you're putting your data onto Dropbox or AWS, who has the keys? Amazon has the keys, Dropbox has the keys. If they lose your data, they may not be liable, right? But you are liable for losing your customers' data. But if you put in a public blockchain, but you own the keys, you hold the keys, then is it very different than just you putting the data in your own data center and you holding the keys? So that's the argument, and I think that's what people should be thinking about in comparing public blockchain versus permissioned ledgers. Just think about where the key control is. And I think that's something that is a recurring theme. We've already seen a lot of the talks in this conference. Identity and key control is where is the key. Forgive the pun.
So to speak, right, the key. Chris, so you sit in the role of CEO of an enterprise. When you're thinking about how you might use blockchain versus permissioned ledger, how does this question affect your thinking?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, at an enterprise level, I think trust, it all comes back to trust. And if you think about an enterprise, they're very much concerned about the trust that they have from their consumers or their customers. So, I think to your point, it's very important, and I guess a chief marketing officer is going to have that front of mind. If they're making tech decisions at the back end that may impact the trust that they've built up with their consumer base, what I'd like to see is, I guess, a challenge from the BSV community in educating enterprises. And I think that'll be my theme throughout, I think, this next panel, and saying, and I guess challenge the status quo and actually provide that education because there are other options out there.
Do you think there's any advantage to a public blockchain, assuming you could deal with the key control and management and the security of that? Are there advantages in your mind to doing something on a public blockchain?
I'm going to say yes. Because I feel like that's the right thing to do.
You don't have to.
I feel all these eyes looking at me. And everyone's going, it's a yes, Chris.
Yeah.
It's a yes.
What do you see as the advantages?
I'm going to pass on that one.
Okay.
I'm going to come back to that at the end.
Okay, great.
Steal everyone's thunder.
So Joshua, when you are dealing with business clients, how do you help them evaluate this question?
The perspective I'd like to take is one, acknowledging the risk and the security, which is big hurdles to get over, is the value aspect or potential, right? So one comparison would be like Facebook's Libra, which by definition is only available to 80% of the world's population. Right. And given the theme of this conference, where we've seen so much Chinese talent here, we would, by using Facebook or whatever, you would be excluding all that, right?
Right.
Thus limiting the potential value that could be on the product. So the same applies to a public versus permission, where you can only use a subset of entities that can contribute, whereas a public, you could potentially have many parties interacting, but not just those interacting, but interact with other data that maybe other people are putting onto the ledger.
Okay. Stephan, what about you?
Yeah, we often talk about the security. It is actually more secure to have it on a public decentralized, a really decentralized network than to have it on 4 servers in a cloud server somewhere. And also the availability. We know that Bitcoin has been available for 11 years to close to 100.0%. There's almost no other system who has that availability. So, and of course the costs. The cost is much lower to use a public blockchain than to have your own services. And from my integration side, if every company, if Coca-Cola should have their blockchain and Pepsi-Cola their blockchain and DHL their blockchain, then we have to start integrating all these blockchains. And as I used to say, the chain is as strong as its weakest link.
Right.
So we have problems there.
It would be like if in the early days of the internet, all major companies started creating their own internet, right? And then we'd have a day today where there'd be Amazon Net and Facebook Net and Walmart Net, and that would be a mess. We wouldn't have achieved, I think, the global growth of a global public internet.
We had that with CompuServe and AOL.
Yes,
Yeah.
for a while. So this leads me to this chart, which I am going to thank Stephan for helping me start, because I took a lot of these factors from a slide that he uses in his presentations in explaining how UNISOT, his company, came to the decision to build on Bitcoin SV. These are just various factors, and more specifically needs, that I think most of us would agree a big business has to meet in order to be able to build upon a blockchain. So let's go through a few of these. So Chris, I can see you nodding your head already. Which of these are top in importance for you?
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the lawful and business regulation friendly. That's an absolute given, but I think it's boring at an enterprise level. Yeah. I'll come back to the trust side of things, which maybe it sort of integrates as well. So for me, I need to be able to trust explicitly the platform or the network, unconditionally. So to get that trust, I need to know that the platform or the system can scale with my business. I need to know that it's stable and consistent and it's predictable, both at a cost level, but also at a platform and protocol level as well. And I think the things that I've heard over the last few days at the conference is that's what BSV is offering up, right? So for me, that's important. You give me those 3 things, I'm going to have the confidence that I can start making business decisions on the back of the applications that I'm delivering both to my operation, but ultimately to my end users and to my customers.
Well, because you don't want to invest the timeline, right, and resources to begin building on something that may not scale. Okay, Stephan, you've evaluated these obviously to achieve UNISOT, because when I think first met Stephan in person, it was at the CoinGeek London conference right after the split of BSV from Bitcoin Cash, and at the time you'd been planning to build, I think, on Bitcoin Cash, and hadn't decided to build on BSV coming into the conference. I talked to you about that before, and at the very end of the conference you came to me and said, okay, I'm persuaded. So what made you reach that conclusion on BSV given these factors?
Yeah, we looked at many different blockchains, and of course the obvious is Ethereum, because a lot of companies are building on Ethereum.
Yes.
But what we need in an enterprise blockchain is scalability, and security. So scalability is absolutely on the top there, and I just almost take it for granted that we also get the security, which is very, very important there.
Mm-hmm. Which of those other factors would you rank next in importance?
And the availability,
Right.
that we have a system available at any time.
Right. Okay.
We had a lot of problem in Scandinavia the last year, where the centralized banking system is going down, or the card providers is going down. And we see it creates enormous problem, specifically in Norway, where we have a lot of ferries between islands. And if you cannot pay with your card, because 98% of all transactions is done by card, and if you cannot pay the ferry, you cannot get home or get out.
Then you're stuck on an island somewhere.
Stuck on an island.
Yeah. Eating fish.
Yeah,
Salmon.
not
Yeah.
that bad. It's really
right,
good.
Yeah. Joshua, let's talk about how you and your clients have evaluated these factors in choosing among the different options we have today, such as Ethereum and other platforms.
Yep, I think one that's technically not on this list, but maybe is across some of these, are data redundancy that could result in cost savings. So I guess that could apply to distributed and immutable and secure as well. So to give an example, earlier this year internally, I worked on a optical character recognition vertical on top of the Microsoft Dynamics. And we've started selling that to our clients. But we reach out to a third party where they scan in invoices, and then we have to take that invoice and bring it back into the ERP. But not only, since Microsoft runs a cloud server, we have to take that document and then put it on SharePoint, the client SharePoint, which is another cloud server. So we're interacting with 3 cloud servers with 3 different documents, which is kind of ridiculous if you talk it out, right? With blockchain, we could just put it on once. It would be the most secure, and then all parties can read it and know. And then it also complies with the regulations where our clients have to keep the financial data for X number of years.
Right.
Because that is a concern. That's the only reason we're putting it on SharePoint, for example, is so they feel safe that they actually have the invoice data.
Yeah, and that's something really important for everyone to remember, which is the laws of all the major countries require businesses to maintain corporate records, business records for certain periods of time. The periods vary, but that's a very consistent legal requirement across pretty much all major jurisdictions.
It would also multiply cost savings for the client and the third party, because the third party charges per document, and they only store it for X number of months because it costs so much, right? But if they get rid of that, they save money. Then the client saves money because they don't need to put stuff on SharePoint. They also don't have to pay for the storage costs within the ERP. So it's multiplied cost savings across different entities.
Let's talk about the factor at the top of the right column, low and predictable fees. We always talk about the need for low transaction fees, right? Why is predictability important? It's something I think gets lost in the thinking sometimes. Anyone want to address that?
I'll have a crack at that. So for me, I would take predictable over low. So at a business, when we're making a business decision, I want to know that I can guarantee that my cost base is a cost base, and even if I have to pay 50% of what, maybe what the low fee would be, I would take predictability at an enterprise level every day.
Right, because then you can budget for it.
I can make the decisions, yeah.
Right, which is, I'm sure Jerry's nodding his head going, this is why, BTC obviously can't support enterprise needs anyways, but its unpredictability in fees would be a serious problem, right?
Yeah. I think like everything on that screen is absolutely important, and it's absolutely true in the case of Bitcoin SV. And when we put ourselves back into the enterprise mindset, it's like, look, if this is going to replace my databases, right, then I need to get everything I get from my database, but also be somehow cheaper or more efficient, right? And I think they see the cheap part, right? If it's low or predictable fees, great. It's scalable without a ceiling, great. That's kind of better than my database solution. But how is it going to meet the other parts which I am paying $1 million a year for in my database, like the proven, verified, stable network, How do I know that nothing's going to change? Because that's the variability part. And I think this is something where Bitcoin SV is the only one that ticks all the boxes. Where it's like, look, it's going to give you all the advantages of a blockchain, and it's also going to be as reliable and secure, probably even more secure than your existing database. Because imagine how much companies pay to monitor their own employees, right? How much do you trust your database administrator? You know, if you don't trust him enough, he could walk away with all your company's data. All those checks and balances and processes in your whole IT department all boil down to who has access to the database. And if your database is public and it's write once, read many, and accesses it to it, any rights to it can never be erased, then it's really hard to corrupt the data, right? And anybody corrupting the data would be found out. And I think that's a selling point which people don't sort of realize so much yet with blockchain and Bitcoin.
So, Joshua and Stephan, I know you're BSV supporters, so you probably say that BSV meets all of those needs. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So I want to ask you, which of the other competing platforms out there do you hear from enterprises or businesses meet enough or all of those needs to that they choose a different platform? Yeah.
Actually, none. It sounds crazy, but if we are looking at any of the so-called enterprise blockchains today, they tick some of the boxes, but not all of them.
Okay. Which do you think are the main competitors in terms of getting mind share from enterprises, right? Where they may already be, for example, thinking I got to use Hyperledger, right? I got to look Corda. Which do you think are the most the top competitors that this ecosystem needs to be really thinking about demonstrating its superiority to?
For our perspective, it's Hyperledger. That's
Why?
Why I think kind of, well, to play with a phrase that everyone knows, kind of proof of stake, right? They've established themselves for a long time. They are a reputable company, and they taken advantage of that to kind of come into space and establish, oh, look at this new private blockchain that we've created, when in reality it's nothing different than exists today or has existed for many years. They do have some capabilities though. They have built some robust stuff, but like Stephan said, they don't check all the boxes. And I guess one good thing that came out of this conference is the S-script, right?
Yes.
Allowing you to do the smart contracts, because that is
Right.
one thing that people like to point out, which is
Right.
why so many businesses have flocked to Ethereum. But Hyperledger is building this as well. But as soon as it's understood that Bitcoin is capable of it for much less cost and much more simple, and it scales, then we could start to bring those people back, and they can kind of see that it was capable all along.
Yeah, I think that was a big missing piece of the Bitcoin SV puzzle in order to convince enterprises. So thank you for S-script. And hopefully there'll be even more possibly to come in the future. Stephan, which platforms do you think are the top competition, and how does this ecosystem start convincing big businesses to use BSV instead of those?
I have to be a little bit careful because I'm still employed by a company.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm still employed by Ernst & Young, and Ernst & Young has gone on publicly saying that they are only using public blockchains, which is perfect.
Right. I don't know if you can speak on behalf of Ernst & Young, but have they articulated publicly why they've taken that position?
Because of the security, because of the costs, and they have understood that the public blockchain is the way to go.
Okay. And that means only recommending public blockchains for their corporate clients.
For the corporate clients
Got it.
only, yes.
Yes, exactly.
The big corporate clients.
Okay. So we can stop there. Okay. Jerry, you used to have to sit in these meetings, obviously, within large companies and evaluating options for building applications. What are the factors a CTO most raises in selecting a blockchain or ledger choice?
I'd say big companies need to, or like to, or are very used to having another company be the counterparty to their technology deployments, right? That stems from the fact that they want somebody liable, right? And to them, initially, when they don't understand, Bitcoin and public blockchains, is they think there's nobody on the other side. So if I use public blockchain, well, if something goes wrong,
Right.
hey, who can we
Right.
blame, right?
Right.
Who's going to insure me?
Right. You can't sue IBM. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no IBM on the other side.
And literally that, honest to God, is the only selling point. Like I'll say something like IBM Hyperledger. It's because IBM is standing and say, look, if anything messes up, we'll make you whole. Right? You can blame us. You pay us for the services. We'll make it good.
You get a contract with
Get a
an
contract.
indemnity clause, that's
Exactly.
negotiated saying, you're going to indemnify me for risk, and you'll have insurance to cover that risk.
So I think companies should stop. See, these companies, IBM is literally using their ability as a service provider, as a business solution provider, and then just sort of hobbling together a private blockchain, aka / regular database with cryptography, and then just basically selling them something that companies have already been using for the last 20 years. What we really need to do is if companies really just need somebody as the interim person to have a liability indemnity clause with, then this is an opportunity for our ecosystem, for maybe a consulting firm or maybe a technical firm to step in and to say, look, sell that service, sell that service alone. Something like Canonical, what they do with Ubuntu, right? Just sell the fact that you will be there to fix things, and then use a public blockchain in the back end. Because honest to God, the banks, they don't really care what the technology is under the hood. They just care that, wow, if I use this technology, I'm going to get cheaper, more scalable, predictable fees, all this great stuff, and I got somebody there who's going to fix things when it goes wrong. And I think that's a great opportunity for somebody to step in and do IBM's job better than what they're doing now, I guess.
And that's essentially how the internet evolved, right? Companies now have no qualms about building applications, projects on the open internet, even though there's no one to be responsible for if something goes wrong just on the open internet, let alone, but there are for service providers. Chris, so in your shoes, sitting as CEO of a company, what can this society of BSV supporters do to better convince you that BSV meets any of those factors?
Probably touches on what I mentioned before. So the industry, and I'll talk about telco industry, but a lot of other industries, they don't know what they don't know. So you look around the room, we have the thought leaders here, the influencers, the tech champions. We want to be engaged and be led and educated by all of you as to how we can transform our business. Again, I'm saying that very generally, but I absolutely mean it because telco industries can't do it alone. They don't know how. They need to be led and taken on that journey, and I think it's very much an education process. So I'd embrace that and welcome it with open arms.
So Joshua, if you're up for this, let's compare against a couple of other competing platforms. EOS, where do you think it falls on any factors there? Good or bad?
EOS.
Token capability, maybe?
That was illegal. Immutable, definitely not, because they have essentially a pseudo-representative democracy type thing, where they could just roll back the chain as soon as one of them gets scammed out of all their EOS. And high availability, that was an issue when they first launched, so that they don't meet that one.
Smart contract, possibly.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, you guess. What about Corda? Stefan, you want to compare to Corda?
I know way too little about Corda.
Okay.
I don't think so either, any of them.
Yeah. Jerry, any comments on comparing against Corda? Like if you had to sit with a enterprise, representative, and they're saying, all right, I'm considering Corda versus BSV, what would you tell them about Corda?
I would say Corda is kind of like Hyperledger. Although you're not tied into IBM being your provider, Corda presumably is going to let you build your own private permission walled garden blockchains. And I do say that maybe there are some small niches where a private blockchain may make sense, but in the long run, once this ecosystem of companies and service providers and consultant companies that operate on top of Bitcoin evolve, then I think any sort of appeal of a private blockchain is going to go away, because I can imagine why you would basically say to your business, I'm going to have the ability for portability of data anywhere, right? So that people who are my clients, if I go out of business as a company, I can give them the keys and they can go away, they can find another data provider or find another service provider, because the data lives out there. I can't imagine any company saying like, I don't want to give that to my clients. They're just saying, well, our little Corda database here, if all our consortium cartel members go out of business or we shut down the database, sorry, we're just gonna maybe give you a zip file and maybe here's all your data. It's kind of like Flickr. Remember you still use Flickr? I hear it's still working, but I used to put a lot of pictures on Flickr. I don't know how the heck to get all my pictures off it anymore. Like my account is expired, and that's a lot of pictures I used to put on there that I just can't access anymore. Now imagine Flickr, all these pictures were on blockchain. Then they could just simply give me my keys and I could, give them to another company who wants to serve my, photo album data. So that's kind of like the big thing of why I don't know, like permissioned versus a public. Public will always have data portability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Joshua, do you want to comment?
One thing I've thought about over the past year is with this private blockchain stuff, you could, in theory, create an incentive where they would like to perhaps commit fraud but say, hey, I'm using a blockchain, so this must be legit, right? So if you collude with, say, 3 or 4 parties or whatever, you might kind of fudge the numbers, because one thing I've understood with working with these clients is sometimes they don't always want an immutable ledger, right? They want to cook the books, or maybe there's stuff they don't tell us, right? So you could have an incentive where, I'll just use some private blockchain, convince the government, and maybe I'll, do some funny stuff behind the scenes.
Nefarious. Have you run into any possible instances of that in your work?
Not with blockchain specific, but I've just more of a philosophical thing. That's something that could happen, because it's a huge buzzword, right? We see people getting into it just because it's right. Blockchain.
Right, yeah. It's like the dot-com era of the 90s. Everybody's got a .com. Let's go back to focus on Ethereum again, because it's been the leading, contender for business use, supposedly for a while, of blockchain, although a lot of that was ICO, tokens. Other than scalability, which all of us in this room know is, a significant problem for Ethereum, how do you think BSV compares against any of those, on those other factors against Ethereum?
The fees would be unacceptable for Ethereum, and we already saw that. As soon as Ethereum tried to put any volume, it failed. So for any enterprise, that would be totally unacceptable. And I've talked about how if that happened with Bitcoin SV, for example, maybe someone that had huge volume came on too early, we would run into the same problem. So the fees would be a non-starter for anyone on Ethereum. That's why I don't get why anyone even tries. Because if they succeed, they will fail on Ethereum, right? It's like a paradox.
Got it. Anyone else want to comment on these factors as compared against Ethereum? Jerry, I know you always have an opinion.
Well, it's not scalable. I think even from day one, when I first heard about Ethereum and I read that yellow paper, and Vitalik came to Tokyo and he had a great pump speech about Ethereum, the first thing I said was like, how does it make sense to get every node on the network evaluating everybody else's contract on planet Earth? That just sounds like a multi-dimensional, exponentially exploding scaling issue. And I don't know, he always felt that he said it would fix it somehow with sharding and stuff. And so that basically means that if you're building something in Ethereum, the thing you're going to worry about is, well, how long is the scaling runway going to go? How much am I betting on the devs, solving NP hard computer science problems so that the network doesn't fall over, and then I have to migrate my data off to another blockchain, something like that. I guess that's the biggest issue. And I think the other one, which is maybe less of an issue now after the DAO hack, you know, everybody in Ethereum was so big on the code is law thing. In fact, when Vitalik said, you know, the greatest thing about Ethereum is writing your own smart contracts, and we can eliminate, you know, 30% of all like trivial law contracts. We can just put them all in smart contracts because code will be law. And I told him, does that mean you want to make developers lawyers then? Because I mean, if you're gonna write the code, I don't expect lawyers to be writing code. So you're gonna be writing code, which means you've just inserted an intermediary between lawyers who presumably are experts at law and a developer who's expert at coding, and now you're gonna have some bad hybrid translation between law and code. And he didn't think that was a problem. But then we had DAO, so I guess they don't talk about that anymore.
All right. Chris, to the extent you are comfortable discussing it, would you be willing to talk about what blockchain or ledger platforms your company has actually considered?
I can talk about it I think at a telco level. So when you look at the industry, you've got a large consumer customer base, diverse geography from a supply chain perspective, multi-party transactions taking place all the time. So you would think telecoms industry as a whole is ripe for the picking for blockchain applications. Overlay that with constant need to reduce cost, improve customer service, whilst maintaining 100% uptime of your network. As a start, and I think as we look to roll out blockchain across telecommunications operations, we should be looking at internal platforms that are improving those internal efficiencies, reducing cost, and removing still elements of very slow and tardy internal processes. So I think as a way to increase that adoption is key. Comes back to the trust. You improve that from an internal perspective at an enterprise level, then get that enterprise sharing with their business partners, and then without not too long down the track, you're going to have those large companies with huge consumer customer base. They're going to open up that blockchain world to their end users. So that would be my approach. Start those low-hanging fruit, and there's plenty of options there in telecoms for blockchain to have a crack at.
That leads me well to the last question area I want to ask all of you, which is probably where everyone should start when they're talking with big companies. What types of applications and projects belong on a blockchain at all? Right? Because you've probably heard companies try to explore doing something on blockchain because it is the trendy thing. Oh, we got to have a blockchain project. I need to pilot something on blockchain. But I've heard of plenty that I'll say, you don't need a blockchain for that. Just do it in your database. So what are your thoughts on that in talking to enterprises and how that relates to possible use of BSV? Stephan.
Yeah, I have my clear answer to that.
Yes.
Supply chains.
Okay.
It's a low-hanging fruit. We have a number of organizations hooked together in a supply chain where they all have their data silos and data warehouses, and they have a problem communicating. Like people, we have Facebook and Twitter and everything. We are sharing tons of information. On the company side, it's the opposite. They're sharing too little information, and that makes the whole supply chain very inefficient. And this is a perfect use case. As we see, there is a lot of company working within supply chain and blockchain, but not this blockchain.
Right. And your company will solve it best.
Absolutely.
That's right. Joshua.
I think document exchange, any type of document exchange is at the forefront with this because
like EDI, for example, electronic data interchange, huge industry.
Especially the more parties you add, the more cost savings and benefits you get. So it has a multiplicative effect. So for example, purchase orders, that would decrease any type of mistakes, or at least on the mutability side, right? You could have multiple parties looking at a document and then act off of that. But also with some of the key stuff that's been discussed, you could have selective disclosure where only bits of data in that purchase order are revealed to maybe different people down the supply chain, in the example Stephan gave. So I think any type of document where two or more parties need to get data and bring different parts of those data into their systems in order to do business with each other.
Chris, what about from the telco perspective? What kinds of things make most sense to do on a blockchain?
So look, the low-hanging fruit is the smart contracts from a supply and inventory management, SLA management perspective. I think that's great. The currency clearing as well. I think in the future, ID management, taking someone's ID and be able to sort of port numbers and that sort of thing, maybe not quite there yet at a consumer level, but I think there's a nice clear path to how we get there.
Okay, and Jerry.
This is not going to be a popular answer, but I honest to God think this is 100% true. Tax accounting software.
Yes.
Reporting
Absolutely,
software.
yes.
Regulatory reporting software.
Yeah. Auditing.
Auditability. Because the one thing that Bitcoin does, which no audit accounting firm, PwC, no accounting firm can, they would love if they could get their hands on, is a record that says, okay, give me your keys and I will do your taxes for you. You don't even have to explain, you don't have to give me receipts because all the receipts are embedded on the blockchain already. You give me the right keys, I decrypt everything, boom, right? Tax return done. I mean, and especially for the Americans, because I hear your tax system is really hard, get through. So, imagine making a tax return as easy as just giving a set of keys, and then for the accounting firm, literally just putting it through an algo, and it spits out your tax return in like 10 seconds for an entire company, right? Not just personal taxes. So I don't see any firms doing this yet because, it's funny how the regulators and accountants seem to think that Bitcoin is only used for illegal, nefarious purposes. But if they only knew.
Yeah, if they only knew, its perfect use is to make things easily, orderly, lawful, and compliant for reporting purposes because it's just a ledger, right? But a global one that's distributed. So I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their thoughts, and I want to thank Jerry, Joshua, and Stephan for their wonderful support and choices of BSV for the work they do. And Chris, thanks for looking into it. I hope in a year I'll see you and we say, I love that project you built on BSV. Okay. All right, give them a hand of applause.